Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dan Genuine. I'm Executive Vice President of Partnerships at Core Education. I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our topic today is financial transformation for private colleges and universities, operating strategies for long-term prosperity.
So the concept of prosperity gap is structural deficit and a bunch of those factors that Rick you covered in your slide, because that's what's going to get the institution to a point where sustaining in its own growth can happen. In order to tackle the business model transformation, there are a few things, and I'll highlight that quickly. One is that it's a multidimensional complex problem that needs a multidimensional complex problem solving approach. It's not one thing or two things, it's multiple things that are strategic in nature that also tackle operational issues fundamental to that business model. That's what's got to change. So it's revenue diversification, potentially asset diversification, looking at capital differently so that all of that capital can be put to use in serving the main purpose of the institution, which is learning and students and investing in its own growth through faculty and staff and operations. In order to do that, it needs us to think differently. And when you start thinking differently, it makes you question and change practices. Change management is a big part of this. And if we don't tackle that head on, sustained systemic issues cannot be changed.
Talk a little bit about gross margins and why do, and particularly in academic delivery, why do some institutions operate more efficiently than others? And here's 10 particular things that impact, that we can do to impact gross margins. In terms of, obviously, we talked a little bit about program mix, but number 3, the continuously optimization. There are certain institutions will optimize academic delivery 2-3 times per year. And throughout the industry, we may sometimes go, a decade or more without optimization. So particularly, I'm going to look at number 9, the effective use of adjuncts. And really, when you're running just a fixed cost where, let's just say if 100% of your delivery was full-time faculty, then you're really at your mercy. If you have a revenue reduction of some kind, your gross margins are going to suffer dramatically with that. Really what you need at all times is a balance of full-time and a balance of part-time, so that you can mix. Oftentimes I've heard institutions say, well, let's cut down on our adjunct professors as a way to save money. And this really isn't dealing with the root cause. It really is understanding that you have to have a mix in order to get the right margins. In terms of thinking about in our unstable market, diversification, as I said, is critical. Speeding up everything. I would urge you all to do secret shopping on your own institution. We do this day in and day out at Core, and it is absolutely eye-opening. I would actually recommend that you go ahead and try to fill out an application for whatever you want to do at your institution, and you will be amazed on how long it takes, what I'm going to call the non-value-added steps that we ask our students to go through, and things that are not on the application that could be incredibly important in the areas of matriculation. But everything needs to speed up, removing of out-of-market policies, and really scrutinizing every detail of the student experience. What I typically see is there's a season to everything. This is the travel season, or this is that season. It really is really some old thinking. What we have to be able to do in speeding everything up is September, December is the golden opportunity for you to make your number for next year. Too often there's a slow pace, and then the pace increases around March, April, and May. What you have to be able to do is speed everything up early. Eliminate, if you have any kind of provisional acceptance, eliminate it, especially if there's a near 100% certainty that this would be removed in the future. Particularly these 3 areas in terms of unlocking the balance sheet. The value of real estate is often the largest asset on the balance sheet. And it doesn't have to be completely illiquid. Sometimes there's non-strategic assets that can be liquidated in order to create a business model transformation implementation, or you can do sales leaseback or a lot of different elements of creating capital for expansion. Also, non-banking, there's definitely a growth in non-bank lenders. And those non-bank lenders can be more strategic and longer term in their holdings. And CORE has worked in evaluating and helping implement non-banking alternatives for our partners. And then finally, endowment. This isn't for everybody, but some institutions have restructured gifts. Some institutions have invested out of their endowment into specific initiatives that are perhaps a new entity that's owned by the college. That particular example would have an ROI and a payback. But there's some interesting things that you can do to unlock the balance sheet. But think of venture philanthropy as opportunity-based fundraising versus need-based. There's so many donors who are losing energy or losing their appetite for major gifts that are just for endowment or a building. That the opportunity investing can really inspire investor confidence. And particularly when there's opportunities, if we put in 3 or 5 million in this particular initiative, it will have a direct and significant impact on the financial performance of the institution. So the opportunity-based funding is incredible for every one of the institutions who are here today. But you do have to get rid of the mindset, the scarcity mindset, and it really requires an abundancy mindset. But capital will follow credible plans and leadership.
When you think about growth, you always say, okay, it requires change. Change brings risk, and risk requires a different way to calibrate and manage to success. It's important, and it's the orientation of the board during times of change and transformation is very different during stable times. So you hear us talk more about that, but leading change is a very necessary element of business model transformation. Can't do without it. So aligning tactical strategies, making sure that the internal operating rhythms have been changed so that the barriers of success has been removed. And it's okay to change things twice and thrice at a tactical level, because you're going to have to get this right. Think about the calibrations. That's what tactical strategies are. We've got to try enough of them and get it right so that they remove barriers to succeed. Internal communications, awareness and understanding of this so that successes and failures are looked upon within the right context. That's very important. The collaboration is great. I worked 16 years within institutions before coming to CORE. We all collaborate. The communication, it all happens, but collaboration with accountability, communication with intentionality, that's the part that is huge. What we've covered till date is all the reasons why this makes it a different time. When we're talking to you in September 2024, it's a different time than what it was. The pace of things, the different dimensions contributing to the instability in the marketplace is different. It also creates different opportunities that are real. There is far greater benefit to looking at large-scale transformations than incremental efforts and impacting to change. The strategic growth building blocks, multiple ones, you need at least 3 to 5 any given time. Those are the ones, they've got to be greater than the prosperity gap or the growth target. There's a lot of immediate tactical items. Focusing on large-scale transformation never means giving up on the tactical strategies. It means complementing that, making sure that the tactical strategies are those that are aligned with the transformation strategies. That's real. There is capital. There is always capital. We talk about the ambition, the inspiration of a transformation creates its own momentum to raise capital. That's the opportunity.
Let's get right into the Q&A. We've got a lot of questions that have come across. One was starting on shared governance. What role does the faculty play in shared governance? Let me, if I could, if Kamalika talked about input, I think that far too many institutions confuse shared governance with shared accountability. And the accountability lies with the Board of Trustees and no one else. So oftentimes you'll have different constituents and they just aren't the fiduciaries, but they may have some interesting insights. They may have some great insights, but at the end of the day, they're not the decision makers, and they may want to take an institution down a particular path that might be different than the Board of Trustees. The board is ultimately accountable and has that decision. So too often times really bad decisions are made by the board because they make it a collective decision when it's their decision and no one else. You can get input, critical, but not to lose the importance of the fiduciary. Kamalika, I got a question here with regards to, it looks to be, you know, we've tried a number of things in the past. We just don't have the confidence in our ability to execute. Can you say a little bit more about that?
It's the reality of many institutions that we work with. You know, you think about complex, multifaceted implementations that need a whole broad and deep level of skill sets, doing multiple ones at the same time. That is an element of not just finding the right resources, but conditioned to run at that rate. So I use sometimes in the past, I've used my example as when I never ran in my life, one time I tried to run and I was able to get through my first mile, but then I wasn't able to do any of that for a long time because I wasn't conditioned. I wasn't conditioned to run. I wasn't conditioned to run. Just because I could doesn't mean that I was conditioned. So it's a matter of having all the talent, which is difficult. I worked at American University, was a much larger institution than some of the institutions that we are working with now. Even at American University, Northwest DC, I didn't have the talent that I needed all at my disposal to put together. And we weren't conditioned to run on 4 complex implementations at the same time. So goodwill, institutional resolve, good plan, these are essential ingredients. But then having the condition to execute those plans with the execution skill sets and the execution know-how. That's why many of this has failed in the past. Not that the ideas were not great; they were good ideas, but that's the talent to execute. And I would encourage you to think in those lines.
A couple of other questions. What's an example of secret shopping? It isn't necessarily talking to people as much as it is fill out an application or two, and you'll just be surprised on how many steps it takes. And put yourself in the position of a student and say, is this really convenient for the student? And why do we have this form? And is this form looks like something that we've been using for the last 10, 20, 30 years? There's better ways to do things. So think about that. One other comment was about, you know, going through the transformation and doing a lot of positive things. But what's the number one thing that a small institution can do to get the first win? I would say a couple things. First of all, you might be working on some big areas, but you may not realize that you're making you have a lot of small wins along the way. And I would say document your small successes and communicate those small successes, because the small successes lead to more small successes, lead to bigger successes, and leads to the organization starting to realize that it is changing. Okay, so you know, if it is you know, you're streamlining certain things, you know, talk about how you're doing it, and talk about the success in just the attitudes of people. So too often times we will don't want to say we'll beat ourselves up because we have a lot to accomplish, but then we look back and we say, wow, we've really actually have accomplished quite a bit. Why don't we take a minute and let's capture those wins and talk. But as opposed to talking about them every once in a while, do more frequent communications so people kind of can see those wins. Kamalika, your comments on that?
Yeah, I was gonna add to it, Rick. I had a professor when I did my master's, and one of the things he told me, I never forget, he said, you change an organization by changing the conversation. So when you have done big transformation things, and some of the larger outcomes will come to life later, Rick, that's the what you were saying earlier is change an organization by changing the conversation. Start talking about the changes that have been made. Start talking about the 1 and the 2 and the 3 improvements that are happening, and then make the conversation about that. And that's a great way to change the conversation, focus on the outcome, capitalize the momentum, and lead into the change management. You'll find many items that can be discussed in those lines, and they create a different conversation, they create a different momentum.
A couple of other questions we have here is, how do you quantify the prosperity gap? Think about 5 big areas. Number one, if there's a deficit, obviously you count that. Are you paying market rates to your employees? Too often, what you see is there's a lot of institutions that aren't paying market rates. So you underpay people, that really creates a constant moving window, people coming in and out because you can't attract and retain good people. Technology. This is always an area where you're underinvesting in technology, product development. How about a really student success and career advancement? How about the areas of your fully funding your replacement cost? Are you really fully funding your mission? I can't tell you how many institutions talk so highly about their mission, but spend so little money investing in it. Take that, and you're going to see this is a dollar amount that you just add in on a modeling perspective. I'd be happy to share with you our formulas, what we've seen plus 50 colleges of where they are without naming them, but there are some trends. It gets big in a hurry, and it kind of sets some context that if you work on small things, you will never be able to address those areas. And so you have to be able to think short-term and long-term, but you've got to have enough of these strategic growth building blocks. The growth could come from some margin expansions. The growth can come from diversification of revenue. The growth could just simply come from better yield by doing things differently. Kamalika, any thoughts there?
I'll give without naming names, a case study where we started working with one institution, Rick, and I always say institutions are not lacking ideation. You have a lot of ideas. You've got the best of talent with faculty, and you've got individuals grounded in mission. So there's a lot of ideas. We started the growth planning process, and there was 3 Excel pages of ideas. The thing is, when you put it in a growth plan, it's oftentimes you put growth in the context of the growth target, which is the prosperity gap, as you've defined, as you've calculated. And many of these become important, but not significant enough. So imagine a campus, most of your teams will say they're working very hard. All of them will tell you they need more resources. So one of the elements that the growth planning does, it puts perspective on what matters most and what matters now. And it's also a great way to say the other things can wait. They're all good. What overworks a campus primarily is 2 things. People are very well-meaning. They're all trying to make a difference, but they're all working on many different things. If everyone's working on 67 things, nothing's making adequate progress on a timely manner. So that's the perspective, that's the focus.